Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, across our beautiful country of Canada, our friends around the world. Welcome back to your favorite Angry Canadian on the 11th day of August 2023. And in a second, I'm going to be cutting into an interview of Tamara Lich by the Rubin Report, and that was down in Florida a very short while ago. And if you listen to it and you watch it, she'd make a great prime minister, in my opinion. She's intelligent, she's articulate, she's knowledgeable. And there have been many great leaders of countries that have been female. India, Pakistan, United Kingdom, all had leaders.
About 280 Canadians had their accounts frozen. And so what that looked like was mothers stuck at the grocery store checkout that had to leave their groceries there, which is a mortifying experience in itself. Like you just said, parents that couldn't buy medicine for their children, couldn't pay their mortgage, couldn't pay their child support. I mean, I was arrested, and my husband was in Ottawa. We had a joint account. I mean, we don't anymore, but we had a joint account. So here he is in a strange city, doesn't know anyone, and has no access to funds.
So, well, let's just start at the beginning, because I suspect that you did not intend maybe 5 years ago to be a leader of a Canadian trucker convoy. I don't think you intended to have to write a book about it. I don't think you intended to have your lawyer in the studio with us right now and a bunch of other stuff. So just tell me a little bit about yourself, and then kind of what led you to the COVID moment, where then you stepped into a whole bunch of other stuff. Mm-hmm. Then we'll spend most of the interview talking about that. Obviously.
Yeah, sounds great. Well, I was born and raised on the prairies in Canada, the prairie provinces, and predominantly work in oil and gas, so very heavy in the energy sector there. And it was through that I started to kind of wake up to what was going on, because the Canadian government is really pushing this net zero, and they were crushing our economy. And they were putting through legislation that was harming families, people were losing jobs, and so I became, I guess, an activist. We started going to rallies and stuff like that, and of course I also was following very closely what was happening at a federal level with our politicians, and then of course COVID hit. Yep. And I'm not sure about what it was like down in the States, but in Canada it was very dark and depressing. We were segregated. I was told my parents weren't even allowed in my own home, or my children, which did not work for me. And people I knew and cared about were getting affected. The suicides in my hometown were so numerous, they stopped reporting on them. So, and that's the kind of stories that we heard, going all across Canada. So I wanted to do something and get involved. And, I made a phone call to Chris Barber, and now here I am.
So a lot has transpired over the last couple of years. And,
yes.
It was interesting for me because, every day I wake up and there's another story, and especially during COVID, another crazy thing happening. But I was noticing that more and more people from Canada were tuning into the show when I was just talking about the COVID craziness in the States. And then suddenly this Canadian trucker thing happens, and then it becomes kind of a worldwide phenomenon. So first, can you just talk a little bit more about how draconian all of the lockdowns and everything were in Canada? And you don't have a federal system like we do, so it was pretty much countrywide.
It was very much countrywide. We were dealing with, our prime minister made the vaccine a wedge issue in the last election. Yeah. And so he was, he came off like a lunatic. He was out there, if you're not vaccinated, you can't get on a train or a plane. Mm-hmm. People were being denied medical care. In Quebec, the province of Quebec, they were going to initiate a vax tax. They had curfews in Quebec. So, and that was across the whole country, this stuff was happening. And like I said, something so simple as, not being allowed to have your own family in your own home. Mm-hmm. People lost their jobs, they lost their businesses. Loved ones were dying by themselves in long-term care homes. They weren't even allowed to go in to say goodbye to their dying parents. So it was unacceptable, and something that I never thought I would see happen in Canada. Never before in our history have we quarantined the healthy to save the vulnerable. Mm-hmm. So
What do you think was the breaking point that got the trucker thing to get going there? Because when people think about Canada, they think about John Candy and they think about comedy and they, like Canada. They think about poutine and Mounties and pleasant people that just are, I love going to Canada. Like everyone's very pleasant and nice and all of that stuff. You don't think of the Canadians as being the people that are going to push back.
Exactly.
And maybe that's what the government was preying on, actually.
Yeah, I don't think that they saw that coming at all. So when the government of Canada was going to initiate the trucker mandate, which was going to prevent cross-border travel, but wouldn't prevent it. What it was going to do was, if you did not have a vaccine passport, then you would have to go home and quarantine for 14 days. And so along our border, we have a lot of truckers that are back and forth daily. They can't take that kind of a hit. They couldn't afford that kind of a hit. And so they have families to feed. And so that was really the catalyst that started the whole thing. And my good friend Chris Barber did a TikTok video calling for a shutdown on January the 23rd. And a lady trucker named Bridget Belton from Ontario had reached out to him. And then this small group of people came together, and we all had very similar ideas, and in 10 days we organized this entire thing and drove cross country.
So you're driving cross country, and now the mainstream media is calling you a bunch of racists and bigots, and Justin Trudeau said that you were transphobes. I mean, it was really like
everything.
It was everything at once. What was the hope? Like when you all began the thing, what was the hope really to break was it to break the government? Was it to break Trudeau? Was it just to turn around on the lockdowns? Like,
the only reason we went was to end the mandates. That's it. There was lots of crazy rumors that we were going to overthrow the government, and I mean, it was all. You
guys were picking up trash after yourselves. Like, it was so ridiculously peaceful. Yeah.
It was amazing. It was one of the most beautiful experiences of my life. A beautiful show of humanity. Everybody that came to the convoy was basically a volunteer, because nobody came there without donating something, bringing something, contributing or pitching in, and like you said, shoveling snow or cleaning up garbage, or everyone was a volunteer, everyone was an organizer.
So the thing that I think really put it on the map, first they're calling you racist and bigots and the rest of it, but okay, we've all been through that. But then this bank account thing happens. So talk about that. Did you have any sense that something like this was coming? How did that get laid out? How did it affect you?
As we were dealing with GoFundMe, that was the initial crowdfunding platform that we used. And we had an accountant come in, and he was actually trying to set up a bank account for us to prevent that money from going into, because I just set it up to go into one of my personal bank accounts. And so TD Bank was really dragging their feet. So I sensed that something was up. And then, of course, as soon as GoFundMe released it, they pretty much grabbed it right away, seized it immediately. So
basically, GoFundMe was taking the money. You were first putting it to your account, but then you were like, all right, I want to put this to a separate account for the. Is it a nonprofit, or what was it?
Well, we did set up a nonprofit after, but at that time we didn't have a board of directors. We did that actually in Ottawa on the fly, created a board of directors so that we could make sure that it was all managed. And
then TD shut you down because GoFundMe shut you down too, right?
Yes, they did. We had a fantastic meeting actually with GoFundMe on a Thursday night. Our lawyers were there, their lawyers were there, and we left that meeting. I left that meeting anyways, feeling very hopeful, like we'd answered all their questions. And the next afternoon, they froze the campaign. So yeah, it was. And then credit to the governor of Florida. I hope I get to shake that man's hand one day. GoFundMe was going to. They came out and said, well, if you request a refund, we'll send it back. If not, then we're going to send it to the organization of our choice. People's donations.
Yeah, criminal.
And it was DeSantis that stood up and said, no, you don't, So, I mean, a credit to him for doing that. They ended up having to refund it all.
Right. So can you just talk about the type of people that were donating and the type of people that were showing up and everything else?
Just regular, everyday people. We had... It was really the most beautiful, beautiful experience. Like I said, Canadians from all across the country, like the West Coast, the East Coast, the North. We had truckers come down from Northwest Territories even. So, but it was, one of the most telling things for me was on the ground there. It was really a jubilant atmosphere. People were hugging and crying and, was talking to total strangers. And it was the immigrant population. So immigrants from Iran, Poland, Romania, all these countries that would come up to me, and they would just have this look of desperation in their eyes. Very telling. They'd seen this coming. They've lived through it already. It was kids and senior citizens and just everyday people. Federal government employees were there, doctors, nurses, lawyers, ex-law enforcement, former firefighters, everyone.
So they come in, they kick you off GoFundMe, they freeze the bank account, but then they started freezing the bank accounts of the people that donated. People that in some cases donated, what, $15?
Yeah. I think the average donation was $50. Yeah.
And then they're freezing the bank accounts of these people who then can't get medicine, can't go about their daily business, literally cannot withdraw money from their ATMs.
About 280 Canadians had their accounts frozen. And so what that looked like was mothers stuck at the grocery store checkout that had to leave their groceries there, which is a mortifying experience in itself. Like you just said, parents that couldn't buy medicine for their children, couldn't pay their mortgage, couldn't pay their child support. I mean, I was arrested and my husband was in Ottawa. We had a joint account. I mean, we don't anymore, but we had a joint account. So here he is in a strange city, doesn't know anyone, and has no access to funds. So,
what were you actually arrested for?
I was originally arrested on a charge of counseling to commit mischief. And then they had to add mischief because
counseling
you can't counsel to commit an offense that never happened.
Right.
So they added a mischief charge, intimidation, counseling intimidation, which, as I said, I'm not a very intimidating person.
Right.
And there's two more. I think one is disobey a police order and something else. I don't know.
Right. And where are you with all of that now?
We have a trial coming up. So Chris and I are co-accused, and we have a trial starting in the fall. So I'll be going to Ottawa around the end of August. We got a 16-day trial over the course of 6 weeks for mischief.
Right. And because I mentioned that your lawyer's here, and he did say to you beforehand, I'm not here to tell you what to say, you tell your story.
Yeah.
What do you want people to know before, I suppose, you go to trial, so that, because a lot of this had to do with public pressure. It seems to me Trudeau only broke because of public pressure, because suddenly those videos, millions and millions of people were seeing that you guys were not burning down the cities like we had seen here in America, and you were not bad guys and racists and white supremacists and the rest of it.
And they sure tried to paint it that way.
Yeah.
So in the fall of last year, so anytime the Emergencies Act is invoked in Canada, within 365 days, they have to have an investigation. So last fall, we went to Ottawa again for 7 weeks to testify. I testified there. And the evidence that came out of there, the superintendent for the Ontario Provincial Police in the Intelligence Department said the lack of evidence the lack of violence was shocking. And he also said that what he was hearing coming from the politicians and the media was not lining up with the intelligence that they were getting. So it was incredible. Yeah. But our mainstream doesn't cover that stuff. So that's the kind of information that we want to get out, is the actual evidence that came out to show that we weren't violent. They were issuing internal memos in the government saying that we were entering federal buildings and causing destruction. Like the lies, the bold-faced lies was quite shocking.
Yeah. Well, can you talk about the media component of this? Because, for as horrible as our mainstream media here, corporate press is in the United States, I mean, you guys have the CBC. It's fully state-funded. I would argue propaganda. I'm guessing you probably don't disagree with me. But then I was seeing guys on the ground like Ezra Levant over at Rebel News, who they were deeply embedded with you guys, and plenty of other people. They're independent. They're under attack now, too.
Well, and thank God for our independent journalists and the citizen journalists too. Like, Rebel News was there; they were amazing. True North was there; they were amazing. There were so many of them, and I mean, the CBC is literally, I think, 2 blocks from where the protest was. So, and so they could see, right? But they weren't coming down and telling the whole story. And for the life of me,
was there anyone on CBC or any mainstream channel that was giving you a fair shake to go on these shows, and
No.
nobody?
No. No, none of them. They had painted their narrative. That's more evidence that came out. They had painted that narrative before I even met Chris Barber, got in Big Red, and we left. So they were colluding. The government was already colluding with our mainstream media. And you're right. The CBC is the one that came out and suggested that we were being influenced by the Russians.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember I looked at Chris Barber. I was like, I don't even know if I know any Russians, you know.
You probably hugged some out on the streets out there.
We sure did.
What was it ultimately that broke Trudeau on this when he finally turned around one day? Because it really seemed like he wasn't going to stop, and then eventually it did. The pressure got released a little bit.
Well, I think what happened. Are you referring to when he revoked the act? Yeah.
Basically at some point there was, I don't know, was that when he revoked the act, or at some point basically the truckers were there. You guys were all sort of at an impasse, and didn't he? Was that when he revoked the act? Or
no, well, what he did instead was invoked what is akin to martial law in Canada, the Emergencies Act.
Right, so that was the Emergencies Act.
That's right.
But what then broke it after that?
Well, I think a lot of it had to do with the banks, because people were seeing that these bank accounts were getting frozen, and they were going and pulling their money out, tens of thousands, like millions of dollars. And I think that he got some pressure from the banks to revoke this thing.
Has there been any reckoning with Trudeau within the party or within Canadian politics altogether? I mean, I know you guys have a sort of somewhat dysfunctional Conservative party, and
Yes.
Things never really seem to materialize on that side. But there's been no reckoning with any of this.
Not yet, no. But I am hopeful that will come. I mean, I know that the inquiry is over, but there's still some legal things happening there. They just did a judicial review of the invocation of the Emergencies Act, so we're awaiting that decision now. So I'm really hoping that he can be held accountable for his decision to have law enforcement beat up our veterans, grandmothers, and it was such a peaceful, beautiful protest. And the footage that came out afterwards, I was in jail, obviously, I didn't see it firsthand, but I mean, I got home and I sat on my couch and I just cried like a baby watching all that footage. These people getting arrested and left in transport vehicles for hours with their hands zip-tied behind their back, driven to the outskirts of Ottawa and dropped off in a snowbank. It was heartbreaking.
How long were you in jail for?
In the winter, I was in jail for 18 days, and then I was rearrested last summer on an alleged breach charge. So I did 30 days in prison last summer too.
What has this taught you about your fellow citizens? Kind of good and bad, I suppose.
Well, I used to sit on the board of directors for a Western Federal Independence Party. We created this political party out of nothing, basically. And so for me, the biggest eye-opener was, we've always had kind of an East-West divide in Canada.
Right.
And, we're always told that we're just a bunch of hillbillies and they don't want our dirty oil and all that stuff. So my biggest eye-opening experience to begin with was I'm sitting at my kitchen table. We'd all been sent home because it was Omicron. Sitting at my kitchen table, and I got my 2 monitors on my table, and we had road captains from every province that would lead like a contingent of trucks in. And so I've got these chats open, and I'm talking to the road captain from Quebec, and she has like 1,000 trucks ready to go. And these guys are beautiful and supportive, and I thought, this has all been a lie. Mm-hmm. Like this has all been to divide us, and it was not true. And then shortly after we got there, one of the first pictures I saw was a Quebecois holding their flag and an Albertan holding our flag, and them shaking hands. And I mean, that was such an amazing, astonishing thing to see.
Yeah.
Like the unity that happened. It didn't matter what color your skin was. It didn't matter what God you worshipped. It didn't matter who you loved. It didn't matter what your income bracket was. We were all just Canadians. And for the last 8 years, that man has been doing nothing but to try and divide us along all of those lines.
Do you think it's hard, he only got, 30% of the vote, something like that?
Like 31, yeah.
Do you think he's actually convincing people that he's right, or is it just that Canadians generally are just nice, so they don't step up, that these moments don't happen that often?
I don't know. People ask me, like, why do you keep electing him? And I said, like, are we though? Like, I don't know if you know what's going on up there right now, but we're in some serious Chinese interference allegations. They've been interfering in our elections and stuff. So, I mean, is he getting elected? I don't know. I guess they're dragging their feet on that too, of course. He tried to once again get one of his buddies to investigate himself. And that actually didn't work out too good for him. But now they've broke for the summer. So it's just astonishing.
So when they reversed this thing and they reversed the Emergency Powers Act and all that, then the bank accounts were open, and then did they start leaving people alone? I mean, did they drop obviously you're going through the case still. Did they drop cases against people, or?
I don't know if they've dropped any charges against people. Maybe one case, but they're pursuing them pretty well, especially in me and Chris's case. Very, very like they're hard. They're coming after us hard.
Yeah. Yeah. What I always ask guests, that somehow, a certain set of people just kind of step into these things. They don't intend on doing these. Some people set out to do something. Some people kind of step into it. You strike me as like the step into it type person. What do you think it is about you that kind of makes you want to do this or have to do this? Or
Well, I love my country. I mean, I grew up fascinated with Americans and their passion for their flag and their patriotism. For me, that was so admirable. And so that was something that I experienced for the first time driving across Canada and meeting all those people, so it's worth saving. We were just talking before we started here about all the people that are leaving Canada, fleeing Canada, which is two words I never thought I'd hear in the same sentence. But if we all leave, then it's worth fighting for. And the people are so good, It was for me, a very divine and spiritual experience. And the unity that I saw just made me love it even more.
Are you seeing a lot of people flee Canada right now? I mentioned to you right before we started. I mean, I'm seeing a ton of Canadians.
Yes.
Canadians are snowbirds down in Florida usually, but I'm meeting more and more people that are like, oh, I'm actually not going back.
Yes.
This is it now.
There's a lot of them. A lot of good people too, like our doctors, our nurses, police, like our professionals. So it's quite alarming.
Did this change any of your politics in terms of capitalism, socialism? You guys have more socialized medicine, that sort of thing. It seemed like some new lines were drawn in regards to those things as well.
No, I think I've always been very conservative minded, and I certainly have never voted Liberal in 30 years probably. Well, because they had a big scandal in the 2000s. You probably heard about the sponsorship scandal. And that was kind of when I really started paying attention to politics and following it a little bit more closely. And I was just disgusted. There's never been any arrests over that. Like billions of Canadians' taxpayers' dollars, and nothing. So yeah, no, I think I'll continue to be a conservative-minded.
The machine has a way of just going on and on. That's why I was asking about, is there any reckoning for Trudeau or anything? Because we have that here in the States. It's like, no matter how many times they lied about the mandates, lied about the efficacy of the vax or how unconstitutional lockdowns were or anything else, nobody gets fired.
No.
Nobody gets fired. It's a weird realization,
It is. It really is.
Are you hopeful that things can turn around in Canada? Or
I am.
Yeah. So where does the hope come from?
Well, again, I mean, my belief in the Canadian people, like they all came together in such an amazing way. And, we can make a change. We just proved that, Like I said, this was just such an organic movement. It literally started off with a handful of people. And I mean, within 24 hours, we realized, holy cow, when we were talking about setting the target for the GoFundMe, Chris had said, well, I think it was $200,000 or $250,000. And I'm like, no way. Don't be ridiculous. I said, I'll set it for 100,000 and I don't even think we'll hit that. Like in the back of my mind, I thought maybe 20 grand. They would drive across Canada, stand there with their sign, get back in their trucks and drive home. And within 24 hours, we blew past $100,000. And so, the support was incredible. And like I said, it was so organic and it just came from nothing. And then all of a sudden, boom. And while the politicians will not acknowledge that what the truckers did changed things, before we even left, provinces were talking about lifting their mandates.
So it was working when you get people out there doing the right thing. It's interesting. I was just thinking as you were saying this, we played a video about 2 weeks ago on my show where outside of the Prime Minister's office, they took down the Canadian flags and they put up the trans flag or whatever that is. It's like these things really are connected in a very bizarre way. Mm-hmm. Do you see that?
Yeah. Oh, I think it's all connected. Everything, the climate emergency, or that we're supposedly under, all of it. I think it's all connected.
Yeah. How much are you guys? So you mentioned a little bit about the energy makers in the West and the sort of energy takers in the East. How much of that affected all of this as well? Just the way the country split in that sense.
Well, I mean, a lot of the stuff with the oil and gas industry, if I'm understanding your question correctly, they wanted to build a pipeline across Canada, and the Quebecois said no way, and so that we could get our product out there and keep it in Canada. Yep. You know what I mean? Instead, they import oil from Saudi Arabia and these other countries. That some of them have some very horrible human rights abuses. Yeah. And that just boggles my mind. I worked in that industry. I know it's not dirty. I mean, Canada has one of the most environmentally friendly and efficient energy industries in the world. We should be a beacon of hope for other countries, and our politicians should be, shouting that from the rooftops and advocating for it. And instead, they're just trying to shut us down. And in the province that I live in, our resource is oil and gas. Like that's our main resource. So that affects a lot of human beings. They're not just numbers. Yeah. These are people that are losing their homes and losing their jobs.
And a lot of them without these jobs, it's, some of the life out there, it's the tundra, basically. I mean, it's not as if there's a million other reasons to be out there. It's for the energy, right?
Yeah. Well, it's a beautiful province. It's an absolutely gorgeous, gorgeous province.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What else should people know about what you guys were doing and where the fight's going and how they can help?
Well, I think the most important thing for me, and one of the reasons why I felt this book was so important, was that the freezing of the bank accounts was huge. And, Canada is the most polite and passive country on the planet, as far as I'm concerned. So, if they can do that in Canada, they can do it anywhere at all. There was no parliamentary oversight. Mm-hmm. There was no court order from a judge. It was just boom. And nobody from the banks even resisted. Mm-hmm. Like, there's notes in our finance minister, Chrystia Freeland's dossier that came out as evidence saying, label them as terrorists and seize their assets. Like, it's mind-boggling the lengths that they went to try and paint us as, January 6th style insurrectionists. Yeah. That's what they wanted, So I think it's an important read. It's an important story. It's a beautiful story of humanity. And I'm just so proud of how it all turned out.
Yeah. Well, and you're still in the midst of it.
Yes,
so I suppose we'll see how it all turns out.
Yes, that's right.
But I assume you're hopeful that the charges will just be dismissed and that'll be it. And
that would be nice. Yeah. But they've been very eager. And like I said, last summer I was picked up on an alleged breach charge and spent 30 days in jail after I was denied bail initially then also. So they don't seem to be letting up. And I think they want to make an example of us to tell, it's intimidation, but they picked their own grandma. So.
And by the way, they weren't until recently, unvaxxed Canadians couldn't even get out of the country.
No.
Now they did reverse that, right?
They
so
did,
unvaxxed people can now get out.
Yeah.
It's one thing to not let people in, but to not let people out.
Yes.
That's
a gross infringement on your rights.
Yeah. Are you raising funds now for any of the legal stuff or anything else?
I'm very lucky. The Democracy Fund is funding my criminal case, and we're also doing donations because we have a civil suit, a $406 million civil suit against us also. Jeez. So and the JCCF from Canada.
Who's the civil suit from?
It's from a lawyer in Ottawa. Basically, that when we had started off as $10 million, so we get to Ottawa at the convoy, and we've raised $10 million in donations, which is unheard of. Yeah. And all of a sudden, we have a $10 million lawsuit, right? And so what this gentleman did was he started this lawsuit. I know, so weird. Yeah. And so then he sent some minions out into the crowd to go find people to put on this lawsuit for him. So that has grown now to $406 million class action suit against me and a number of other organizers. He's also
But what are they
now
charging you with? Like
nuisance.
Disturbance of
nuisance, honking horns.
Even though it was honking horns. Even though again, you guys were cleaning up and shoveling snow and purchasing things at the stores without burning the stores down.
Yes.
Model protesters. Actually.
So we're raising funds for that so that we can, start doing, get a bit more aggressive, start, doing some motions and stuff like that. So yeah, yeah.
And you're not going to move to Florida. That's my last question. You're going to fight it out. You're going to fight it out. We were talking right before about how there's a value in fighting and staying and all that, and sometimes there's a value in moving on. But you're in the fight and stay mode still.
I'm in the thick of it now. I can't leave now. Although I do really like Miami, I will definitely be back here.
Yeah.
Yeah. What a beautiful city and beautiful people.
Well, we will link to the appropriate. What site is it now? It's not GoFundMe, obviously.
The Democracy Fund.
The Democracy Fund. Okay, so we'll link to that.
Yeah.
We'll link to that.
And then the convoybook.com is where you can find the book, and that's also on Amazon. Also, yeah.
And Canadian truckers rule, according to Elon Musk, right on the cover over there. I mean, that must have been something when you start seeing all of these major people that were supporting you that you had no idea that was
even President Trump had said something about the truckers. That was pretty surreal.
Yeah,
very surreal.
Well, thanks for coming down to the free state of Florida, and I wish you a lot of luck on this adventure. And if it all starts up again, I will still be talking about it. So
Thank you. Thanks for having me too. Really appreciate that.
Yeah.